Coming up on this episode, taking a further look at the Warriors' controversial decision to start Jonathan Kuminga over Draymond Green at the power forward spot for the foreseeable future. What does it mean for all parties involved, and how can we as fans evaluate whether this is the right or wrong decision as the season progresses? Welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. Hope you're all having a good weekend. Sitting down for this episode because I wanted to delve more into perhaps one of the biggest things that I think has happened to the Warriors over basically since they won the 2022 championship, is what I would say. In Steve Kerr's decision now to start Jonathan Kuminga at the power forward spot over Draymond Green moving forward. We'll see how long it lasts. But this is a critical juncture for the franchise, not just for the short term, but for the long term as well. Like, this is something that we could look at in a decade. Hopefully it all goes well and Jonathan Kuminga does develop into a star and he's still at the Warriors in 10 years' time. That's exactly what Draymond Green was kind of talking about in his post-game press conference yesterday, where he basically said, once I retire, once I'm out of here, I'm still going to be a fan of this franchise. I want the franchise to do well. And hopefully that's led by Jonathan Kuminga. So first of all, I want to start with Draymond. There's so many different elements to this, and I want to get into a few people individually and then how we as fans can evaluate this as it goes ahead. But I want to start with Draymond because I've been critical. I think a lot of people have been critical of Draymond, and sometimes his lack of self-awareness, particularly with a lot of times not taking wholehearted responsibility for some of his errors on the floor, and not talking about basketball side of things, but more so some of his indiscretions and misconduct that we've seen on the floor, or whether it was in regard to the Jordan Poole incident. I know a lot of people were kind of critical of Draymond where he had that interview thing of sorts before the start of the season on the TV coverage just before the opening game of the season, following that Jordan Poole incident, where he kind of made it a lot about himself and didn't really own up necessarily to the mistake in a way that many people wanted him to. So we can criticize Draymond for a lot of things across the course of his career, but he is an all-time legend of the Golden State Warriors franchise. And I want to pay him huge credit for his self-awareness in this scenario. He could have made this a lot more difficult and a much bigger story than what it already is. Like, it's a big story as it is, but Draymond could have made it a lot more difficult. And if you look at the comparison between this and Klay Thompson last season, like, this is twice now within an 8-9 month period where an all-time legend of the franchise has been demoted essentially to the bench. Now, I'm not sure it's a demotion as such for Draymond because in reality, like, these are vastly different circumstances. Yes, you've got Klay Thompson and Draymond Green. The stature in which they're held at the franchise is very similar, but the way that this move to the bench has happened for each player is vastly different. But I think Draymond deserves a lot of credit for how he has handled himself this season in general. I think he's been excellent, but specifically over the last 24 hours. And again, the comparison between him and Klay, where Draymond said after the game yesterday, after the disappointing loss to the Timberwolves, that Steve had called him and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about this idea. Are you going to be okay with it?" And Draymond basically said, "Yeah, of course I'll be okay with it, because I'm a big fan of Jonathan Kuminga and I don't want to be the one standing in his way of blossoming. And if he's next up, we've got to see it. And I want to give him that opportunity, and he deserves that opportunity." So for Draymond to say that takes a lot of self-awareness. You look at what Klay did last season, where there was a report shortly after. Now, we can remember that Klay came out in that Utah Jazz game and went off for, I think, 35 points. Had a great game. But there was a report shortly after that when Steve initially told him, Klay yelled. This is per ESPN. Klay yelled at Steve and some of the assistant coaches, basically stormed off, and then had to come back and later apologize. So the comparisons between Klay and Draymond, and there's no doubt that Klay's uncertainty in regard to his role certainly played a factor in his decision to ultimately leave the Warriors and join the Dallas Mavericks in free agency last season. It was a sign and trade, but as a free agent, essentially. So, again, credit to Draymond. Maybe it's a little bit easier in the fact that, hey, Draymond's still under contract for another couple of years, making $25 million. And I think that's the thing. I think there is a level of respect between the franchise and Draymond and the franchise, mutual respect there, that this, if it works, will all be pretty seamless and could actually be fantastic. And I think Draymond is well aware of the future of the franchise. You go back to the offseason where he went to the front office, who apparently, according to Draymond, were about to make a trade. And Draymond said to them, no, that's a bad trade. That might help us in the short term for me and Steph, but for the long term, this franchise, that's a bad trade. And basically talked them out of it, even though it might have helped him and Steph try and win a 5th championship. And so I want to give credit to Draymond because I think he is self-aware enough to know that I've done a lot for this franchise. I've done so much. 4-time All-Star, brought 4 championships to the Bay, brought the greatest period of the franchise's history into existence here over the last decade, done so much. But at the same time, you know what? This franchise has also done a fair bit for me. And they've also put up with some crap from me over the last few years. And so, you know what? Whatever I can do to make this franchise better over the remaining years of my career, I'm going to do it. And so I think that's part of his thinking, that he sees Jonathan Kuminga, young player, needs the opportunity. I'm not going to be the one to stand in his way. And Draymond, again, self-aware enough to go back to when he initially came into the starting lineup for David Lee because of an injury, and then took that starting role off an experienced veteran. And so this is a similar situation. Hopefully for the Warriors, it works out to a similar degree where in 10 years' time, or even longer, 12, 13 years' time, it's Jonathan Kuminga doing the same thing for another young player. Now, I don't think that's necessarily going to happen. That's probably a pipe dream. But at least the Warriors are giving him the opportunity, and Draymond is giving him the opportunity and giving Steve Kerr his blessing to say, yes, you try this out. We'll see if it works or not. But I think for Draymond to accept it in a way that Clay was never able to. And again, the chemistry, the team morale, the locker room, Draymond could have made it incredibly difficult if he said to Steve, nah, F you. I'm a better player than Jonathan. Draymond Green is a better player than Jonathan Kuminga is right now. That's the thing. If you look at the two cases between Clay and Draymond actually would have the right to be way more upset. Because this isn't a form thing with Draymond. Draymond's been the second best player on the team this season, you'd say. Maybe the third if you want to argue Wiggins, whatever. He's one of the best defensive players in the league. He's shooting the ball at a career-high percentage from 3. There is absolutely no issue with Draymond Green's form. In fact, he's been better this season than probably last and the year before that. Like, Draymond's been huge. So this isn't a form thing for him. In fact, it's not about him at all. It's about Jonathan Kuminga. Now, maybe there's an extent of, it's about managing Draymond a little bit. I still think he's going to play the same amount of minutes, 28, 30 minutes. He's still going to be closing games at center. So it's not really about him. And the fact that he's self-aware enough to realize that and still say, yep, that's fine. I'm okay with it. Like, I think that's huge. Absolutely huge. In contrast, and I don't want to kick Clay by any means. For those of you that know, like, Clay's my favorite player of all time. But the way he handled that situation was vastly different. It was a lot worse in terms of impacting the locker room and stuff like that, by the sounds of it, by the reports. And clearly played a factor in his decision to leave. There's no doubt about that. And clearly just wasn't happy with a rookie, Brandon Podziemski, taking his role. But you know what? That was brought about because of Clay's own form. Clay shouldn't have been able to turn around and be pissed off at anyone else but himself. Because his form warranted that demotion. Draymond, his form doesn't warrant a demotion to the bench. There's nothing to do with his form. And so if anything, again, he should be the one that has the right to be pissed off about it. But he's not, because he's self-aware enough that, hey, you know what? This is what the franchise needs to do at this particular time. And I knew that this time was probably going to come. I've wrote about it previously. I've spoke about it previously. That at some point, if the Warriors want Jonathan Kuminga to be a star in this league, if he wants to be a star in this league at the Warriors, it's probably going to have to be at the expense of Draymond Green in terms of a starting role. Now, did I think it was going to come a quarter of the way through the season? Probably not. Did I think it was going to come when the Warriors were actually playing all right? Like, yes, they've lost 6 of their last 7, but overall on the season, they're still in a playoff position. They're 13-9 on the season. I thought if this was going to happen, that it would be because the Warriors were around about 500, maybe below 500, 10th, 11th seed, and they just had to take a massive gamble. And so this is how it came about. So I think it's a surprising position in which they've decided to do this, but I think it's actually the right one. Now, we'll get on to Kuminga here. But again, credit to Draymond. Part of it, I think, is certainly to manage him. I'm also interested to see, like, does he actually, like, how many minutes does he play with Steph? How many does he actually run the second unit? Because that's the thing. The Warriors kind of need a backup point guard if Pods is going to start next to Steph. And we saw the Pat Spencer minutes yesterday. I don't think any fan wants to see those. Don't think we want to see Pat Spencer minutes. So does Draymond actually, like, is he kind of the pseudo backup point guard? Does that develop into a thing? Who knows? And I think there's also a part of Draymond that knows, because this isn't a form thing, that if I really want to, I could just go, like, Trace Jackson-Davis, Kevon Looney, they aren't setting the world on fire. But Loon's playing well. He's playing fine. TJD's been very disappointing. But Draymond clearly a superior player than those two. If Draymond was to go to Steve and say, you know what? My body's feeling good. I think I can actually start some games at center here. Then Steve would be like, no worries, get in there. Like, he can take that center spot if he wants. Now, can he take that power forward position back from Kuminga? Maybe if he demanded it, but I don't think Draymond will do that. I think Draymond will allow this to play out to a point where it either succeeds and he's just the backup unless he wants to start at center, or it fails to the point where Draymond doesn't have to say anything. Steve will be like, Draymond, get back in there. Sorry, JK, you had your opportunity, you blew it. Okay, let's move on to Kuminga. Okay, what does he have to do for us to dictate whether or not he's taken the opportunity or he's failed? It's going to be pretty obvious, but in terms of actually putting some numbers behind it here, I think is certainly fascinating. So what does he need to do for this to be a success? According to StatMuse, I looked it up, Jonathan Kuminga has played 35 games in his career, which is not much. This is his 4th season. 35 games of 30-plus minutes. Yes, Thursday's game against the Rockets, where he had his career high 33 points. That was the first time he played 30-plus minutes all season. I think the Warriors know. Okay, we just need to give this guy a run of 30-plus minutes. See what happens. Because if you look at the numbers, in his 35 games of at least 30 minutes throughout his career, Jonathan Kuminga averages 20.2 points, 5.6 rebounds, 2.4 assists, a steal, and his shooting splits are 55% from the floor, 43% from three-point range, 73% from the free throw line. Okay, so if you're an optimist, if you're a glass half full, this is going to work, you are looking at these numbers as the reason why. Because when Jonathan Kuminga plays 30-plus minutes a game, those numbers are excellent. They are the numbers that classify you as maybe not an all-star, but you're pretty close to it probably if you're putting up those numbers. And you're going to be worth a lot in restricted free agency, which is another element to this that I'll get into. The Warriors are a plus 0.7, plus minus, on average, I should say. I think they're a plus 24 overall in the 35 games that JK has played 30-plus minutes. So that's a lot of minutes for the Warriors to be just better than their opponent, basically. And so that's still a work in progress. Like, you need to see the number bigger than that, obviously, in the plus minus. But from a purely statistical box score point of view, which I know is a very simplistic way to look at it, but it's often the best as well. These are the numbers that I think Kuminga has to put up over the next however long it may be. He needs to average 20 points a game. He needs to average probably 6 rebounds, 2.5 assists, right? Steal a game. Although I'm less worried about that. It's more so his overall team defense that I'm worried about. Okay? The shooting splits, yeah, he needs to be above. His shooting splits this season have been appalling, really. At least prior to Thursday's game against the Rockets. He needs to be over 50% at minimum, probably close to that 55 that he is, that I just spoke about in terms of his 35 games over 30 minutes. The 43% from three, I don't think he's going to start shooting 43% from three. But if he can be mid to high 30s, that's possible. Maybe that means his numbers, like his points per game, actually come down a bit. He needs to be at least 18, 19. I think 18 is the bare minimum for him. If he's under that, it's not working, because at that point, I think most would probably say that the offense isn't good enough to be worth the defensive downgrade that you're going to feel from going from Draymond to Kuminga. You're going from one of the greatest defenders in the history of the game here to a guy who has the athletic build to be a capable defender, but he's way too raw. He makes way too many mistakes. And again, part of that is because you just haven't played him enough. So maybe we do see a big improvement on that end of the floor as well from Kuminga. It's not just the offensive end that we've got to look at here. But I think more so, you look at the individual numbers. Can Kuminga be a 20 point, 6, 7 rebound, couple of assists, 50, 35 at least? Maybe like 52, 53, 36, 37 from three. Free throw needs to go up. I think he's like 60% on the season. That's appalling. Needs to get it up to probably 75, 70, 75 at a minimum again. But overall, this is actually not about Jonathan Kuminga individually. The success of whether this works or not is going to be dependent on what the team does, right? And as I keep saying, it's a win-loss business. If the Warriors win games with Jonathan Kuminga in the starting lineup, then it obviously makes a difference what he's doing individually, but it probably tells you he's playing well individually. And even if he's slightly off and doesn't have a great game, as long as the Warriors win, there's not going to be this push for change to him being in the starting lineup. So that's the ultimate. Doesn't matter about the individual numbers. The team win or lose. Across this last 10-game stretch where Jonathan Kuminga has started at power forward over Draymond Green, what's the Warriors' record? That's going to be what it comes down to. The Warriors are currently 4th in defensive rating in the league right now. Jonathan Kuminga now starting over Draymond Green. Where does that slide them to? Okay? Does their offensive rating improve? And how much by? With Kuminga as the starting power forward. It's going to be, at the end of the day, basketball is a team game. That's what matters. So this is a lot about Kuminga. It's way more about Kuminga than it is Draymond. It's all about giving him the runway, the opportunity to thrive in a way that he's never been afforded before. This is the biggest opportunity he's ever had in his NBA career. It's totally about him, but whether it works or not is based on how the team performs. And he's obviously going to be a big part of that. So I don't think it will necessarily work the way the Warriors want it to, because as I said yesterday on the post-game live, that I do think the offensive upgrade probably won't be worth the defensive concerns you'll have going from Draymond to Kuminga. But what I do want to say before we finish up on the Kuminga aspect of it is that we shouldn't underestimate the pressure that is now on him. And he wants it, right? He wants it. So let's not be too critical, I suppose, afford him too much in the way of, I don't know, but he wants this pressure, but it is significant pressure. We can't lose sight of that. This is a guy who's 22 years old, who is now taking the starting role of a 4-time NBA champion, a 4-time All-Star, a former Defensive Player of the Year, one of the greatest players in this franchise's history. You are expected now to come in, average 20-plus points a game on a legitimate playoff team where you are playing alongside the greatest player in franchise history who is nearing 37 years of age. Okay, we cannot underestimate the pressure that is now on Jonathan Kuminga. Oh, and not to mention you're a restricted free agent and you're looking to make $150+ million this offseason. And whether you get that money or not is purely going to be based on what happens here with this opportunity. So we can't underestimate the pressure that is now on Jonathan Kuminga, but this is so much better for him than being in a bench role and one night playing 12 minutes and the other night playing 25 minutes and one night playing 18 minutes and not knowing when he's going to be on the floor and at what points of the game. Okay, this is what he wanted. So can you take advantage of the opportunity? We'll wait and see. But I do think it's worth mentioning that, yes, we shouldn't afford him too much slack because this is the pressure he wants, but he is under pressure. And this is just what young players or NBA players in general have to face. But a young player that's at the Warriors where you're playing alongside Steph Curry, that's just amplified tenfold. So it's going to be super fascinating. Just a couple of other aspects to this. A lot of fans, I think, have come out after Steve and Draymond and Steph spoke after the game yesterday. A lot of fans have come out and said, oh, well, this is just to try and, when Steve says he wants to maximize Jonathan Kuminga, he really just wants to maximize his trade value. Let's lift his trade value to a point where he actually, like a young team, rebuilding team, looks at him and thinks, wow, okay, yeah, no, we really want that guy. We're going to give up valuable assets, a valuable, experienced player that's going to be a better fit for the Warriors, a better piece for them come the playoffs. A lot of people saying that, right? A lot of fans. I'm not necessarily, does the trade value, does that come into it? Yes, I do think it does. It is an element in it, okay? But probably not for the reason, not as much as probably what you think. I think ultimately that if you believe that this is simply a trade value move, that's a pretty pessimistic outlook on the franchise and what they're trying to achieve with a 36-year-old Stephen Curry who's their greatest ever player. That's pretty pessimistic. I still think, now we can look at a bunch of moves that, yes, would tell you to the contrary, non-moves that would tell the contrary. But I still think this franchise is trying to win. Okay, I still think this franchise is in the business of winning basketball games, not prioritizing a 22-year-old's trade value over winning games of basketball. I don't think that's the case. I think the priority is winning games. Again, is there an element of the Kuminga trade value piece? Yeah, cool. Absolutely. But it's not the priority. Okay, the priority is to still win games. The greatest and desired outcome for Golden State in this scenario is that Jonathan Kuminga takes this opportunity with two hands, thrives, and puts them in a position where they're not even thinking about trading this guy. He kind of did it middle of last season, just before the trade deadline, where he started to take off and now got to a point where he's actually kind of untouchable. Now, we can argue whether that should have been the case or not, but it was. And so that's the ultimate goal here, is for Kuminga to take this opportunity and just kind of like what we've seen with Andrew Wiggins, where Andrew Wiggins has gone from a point where he had really no value to being so valuable to the Warriors that they're just not going, they're not even thinking about trading him anymore. And that's the same for Kuminga. This is not a situation where the Warriors are hoping to up his trade value. This is a situation where he smashes through that and his trade value is so high that you would never think about trading him. Right? That's the desired outcome. It's not, let's get this guy's value up, show potential rival teams, potential teams that could trade for Kuminga what he can do, and then we'll ship him out. No, that's not what they're trying to do. Okay? It may be what ends up happening, but I think if Kuminga does get traded before the deadline, it's because they tried this and it failed. And they realized, hey, you know what? This guy isn't the guy we thought he could be. He's not the guy we want to pay $100+ million to. He's not a starting caliber player on a playoff team. Let's go and get someone who is. Let's try something different. And that's why I think this is the right decision, because at the very least, you are going to get a resolute answer here. I don't think there's any wiggle room. It's either it works or it doesn't. It's either it works and this guy is a big part of your future, and you keep him and you pay him whatever he wants in free agency, or it doesn't work and he is shipped out by the trade deadline. Okay? But if it doesn't work, then that doesn't mean his trade value is going up. So for those of you that think, oh, this is just a ploy to get his trade value up, no. He either plays well and you keep him and he's a big part of your future, or he plays badly, his trade value doesn't go up, but you still probably got to get rid of him anyway. And try and take advantage of whatever trade value he does have left. Because you at least have the answer of what this is. And again, this is the pressure on Kuminga, is that the February 6th deadline is less than 2 months away now. Like, this is the period. This is the period right now you have to take. Otherwise, your tenure at the franchise is probably going to be short-lived and you're probably not going to be here in 2 months' time. So, I like it simply because, again, do I think it's going to work? You know what? Probably not. Because as I said on Postgame Live yesterday, the career so far of Jonathan Kuminga would suggest that is Steve Kerr all of a sudden, is this going to be the difference, and that he's going to be a 30-plus minute per game player now for the rest of his career under Steve Kerr? That's a pretty big... If you say yes to that, you're going kind of out on a limb based on history. So based on history, you'd say this probably won't work. But at least you're going to find out. And that's why I think it's a good decision. I think at least, I've said so many times, the Warriors kind of backing themselves into a corner by not really deciding what they want to do with Jonathan Kuminga. He is one of the biggest what-ifs in the league. He's one of the biggest enigmas in the league, where really you've kind of got like a lot of people thinking, oh yeah, he's supremely talented. He can be the next face of the franchise. He can be a star player. And then you got a heap of people on the other side who are just completely out on him. Who are just, this guy is just not it. Not a fit for the Warrior system whatsoever. Never going to be that guy. Truth be told, like, we don't know either way. We still don't know. And so at least this period should give us a definitive answer on that. That's why I like the move. I like the decision. Even if I think it's not going to work, I do like the decision. Now, from a Steph Curry point of view, because I think we've always got to look at this as like, what would Steph think about this? He had a quote after the game, said, "The experimental phase of trying to unlock new looks, new go-to sets, put the ball in his hands, it's time for that for sure." I think a lot of people would probably look at this and think, really, like, we're putting a lot of faith in a 22-year-old fourth-year player alongside Steph Curry. And I agree with that. Maybe that's why it just doesn't work in the end. But yeah, I think it's worth the risk. I think Steph would acknowledge that it's worth the risk. This is a nearly 37-year-old superstar with very little support in the way of another 20-plus point per game scorer. Steve Kerr can call Andrew Wiggins a 20-point per game scorer. He's still not really. He's like 17 points a game. But you want a legit 20, maybe 22-point per game scorer? Here's your best avenue to doing it without a trade. Okay? So at least let's try and get this brief period where we think if we give this guy 30-plus minutes a game, he can average 20, 22 points a game. Let's see if it works. And if you're Steph Curry, and you have so much of the offensive burden on you, you should like the idea of, hey, you know what? Instead of running around as much as I do, I'm just going to go sit in the corner this possession. We're going to give the ball to JK, let him go to work, try and get to the rim. And you know what? If he needs a bailout and a kick to the corner, then I'll be here. But outside of that, I'm actually not really going to be running around that much. Now, again, maybe that doesn't work, but for Steph's longevity and for Steph physically, and we know he's battling the knee issues at the moment, I think this could actually, again, if it works out well, it could be great for Steph. Could be great. And again, that's why I think it's worth taking the risk. It's worth trying to find out. Again, whether it works or not, probably won't. But it's worth finding out and seeing how this team could look differently again I'm sure Steph and Draymond would have been watching on the sidelines on Thursday as JK took over in the fourth quarter, had 14 of his 33 points in the final period. Single-handedly led the Warrior offense, basically. Yeah, a little bit of Wiggs in there as well. He was good. But pretty much single-handedly led the Warrior offense down the stretch to a win against the second-best defense in the league in the Houston Rockets. Steph and Draymond would have looked at that, particularly Steph, as the offensive hub, the engine of the Warriors offensively. He would have looked at that and thought, you know what we could do with some of that. We could do with some of, let's just get the ball in his hands or Wiggs' hands and I'll go and sit on the perimeter and not try and run around 5 different screens to get open. And so this is not only a huge challenge for Kuminga, for Draymond, for Steph, it's a huge, huge challenge for Steve Kerr, who has drawn so much criticism. Thought he was really good on Thursday night because he adapted to the personnel that he had. He stopped trying to run all these actions that he usually would for Steph because Steph wasn't out there. He ran plays to get Kuminga and Wiggins going downhill and it worked effectively. Now it's about incorporating those and trying to mix up as much as you can between retaining who you are, what you've been for the last decade as an offense revolving around Steph Curry, with trying to incorporate new stuff with a guy who can be a weapon, but in a different way. Huge challenge for Steve Kerr. So I am this is as interested as I would have ever been about a Warriors team a quarter of the way through the season. Because we get to this point, and I watch every game, I'm always interested, but you do get to a point between now and probably a few weeks to go before the deadline where things can dull down a bit, where you're just thinking, okay, it's the dead part of the NBA season. And even I'm feeling that a little bit about other games. I'm certainly not as interested in, I'm still watching the NBA, but I'm not as interested in trying to follow and cover every game than I was at the start of the season, where you're just trying to eat up as much NBA basketball as you can. I'd be watching multiple games a day, and the games I didn't watch, you go and watch afterwards, whether it be 10, 12-minute highlights or actually watching full quarters, full games, trying to eat up as much of it as you can. I'm not really in that mindset right now because that's just what happens, I think, at this point in the season. But right now, in terms of my interest in the Warriors, this is one of the most fascinating points that I can remember over the last couple of years. One of the most critical junctures. It's super fascinating. What happens here over the next 10 to 15 games? We'll wait and see. It's now wait and see, but I do like the fact, as I keep saying, that they're at least trying it out. Warriors play the Timberwolves again tomorrow. Not going to speak too much about it. Wiggs is questionable with that ankle issue. Moody is questionable with that knee issue. Of course, they both left the game. Well, Moody didn't play at all in the second half. Wiggs left very early in the third quarter. Really don't need to speak too much. The Warrior offense just has to be better. He had 22 turnovers yesterday, 39% shooting from the floor, 28% from three-point range. Pretty simple. Make some shots. Don't throw the ball all over the gym. Your offense just has to be more efficient. Pretty simple. But it's complicated in a manner of, okay, now you're going to be starting Kuminga. You've got to be running plays for him. He's got to take advantage of that. And it's going to be difficult. Coming up against the Timberwolves is a much harder equation, I think, for him than it is the Houston Rockets, because they've got Gobert, they've got Naz Reid, who isn't a great rim protector necessarily, but there's just a lot more size in the paint for the Timberwolves than there necessarily was with the Rockets. So, super fascinating period for the Warriors. I desperately, I am a fan. I'm a fan of this franchise. I'm a fan of Jonathan Kuminga. I want this to work. I really want this to work. So I think fans that are hoping that this doesn't work and that it's the cultural, well, not the cultural, but it is the catalyst for Kuminga to be traded and for real changes to be made, I can understand that perspective. But ultimately, if you are on the Warriors, I want you to succeed. Right. It's I'm watching the cricket at the moment. Australia got absolutely belted in the first test against India. We got smashed. A lot of our guys, particularly our batters, being heavily criticised. Sorry if you're American, you'll have no idea what I'm talking about. But a lot of our batters in the media absolutely smash from pillar to post, calls for guys to be dropped from the team, everything. And I'm like, you know what? I'm a fan. So whatever team they put out on the park, I'm going to support them and I'm going to want them to do well. The amount of people that wanted Marnus Labuschagne out of the team. And yet, I'm watching him bat yesterday and I'm desperately hoping he makes runs because I want the incumbent people to succeed. Okay? Cool. Would it be nice if, Jonathan Kuminga was traded for Giannis Antetokounmpo at the trade deadline and we got Giannis? Yeah, cool, great. But I just much prefer Kuminga to become Giannis. I just prefer that to happen because we follow these journeys. Jonathan Kuminga has been on the Warriors now for 4 years. Being a fan is being invested. Okay? And to me, from my perspective as a fan, you want things to work out for everyone that's on the team. Unless there's extenuating circumstances and there's a reason to I don't even know what those extenuating circumstances are. All I know, Jonathan Kuminga is a Warrior player. I want him to remain a Warrior player. To do so, he's got to take advantage of this opportunity. So I'm looking forward to seeing. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel already, that would be greatly appreciated. You can follow me at POC252. That's POK252 on X/Twitter. Follow us, Golden State with Mates on Instagram and TikTok as well. I'll be back for a post-game live after the Timberwolves game tomorrow. Let's hope for a different result. Thanks again, guys.